Hi, it is that time for the book of Esther to be read as we lead up to the feast called Purim. Purim means lots, and that will be described a little bit further in this book of Esther. Let's start in chapter 1. Now it happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Cush, over 127 provinces. In those days as king, Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he held a banquet for all his officials in attendance, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the officials of his provinces in his presence. At that time, he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. When those days were finished, the king held a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the courtyard of the garden of the king's palace. There were curtains of fine white and violet linen held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic floor of porphyry marble, the mother of pearl, and mineral stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful in proportion to the king's bounty. But the drinking was done according to the royal law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he was to do as each person pleased. Queen Vashti also held a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was cheerful with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Mista, Harbona, Bigta, Abagta, Zetar, and Zarkas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal turban, in order to display her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's orders delivered by the eunuchs, so the king became very angry and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to his wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king to speak this way before all who knew Persian law and justice and were close to him, namely Karshena, Shetar, Admata, Tarkish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 eunuchs of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, since she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, delivered by the eunuchs? And in the presence of the king and the other officials, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the officials and all the peoples who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, so as to make their own husbands despicable in their sight when they say, King Ahasuerus commanded the Queen Vashti be brought to his presence, but she did not come. And this day, the wives of the officials of Persia and Media who have heard about the queen's conduct will talk about it to all the king's officials, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may not come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout the kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. Now this word pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man was to be the ruler of his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. So before we get to probably what is the most talked about part of this chapter, I just wanted to mention in verse 5 something that came to my mind as we're coming on to these feasts. The next feast is going to be Passover, and that unleavened bread that follows the very next day lasts for 7 days. First day being a holy day, and then that seventh day being also a holy day. And it was mentioned by Miss Holisa Elwine that the Passover is one part of a bookend. And then Sukkot, the fall feast that also lasts for 7 days, is the other end of the bookend. And that may not make sense to you right now, but for me, that's what came to my mind was he's also holding a feast lasting 7 days. And that being on that last day, he wanted to present what was important to him, his wife, whom he held in high esteem, that she was this most beautiful treasure of his. And, you know, she refused to come. And while there's defiance in that, that also made way for there to be a position open, which we know that Esther comes into. Now, what do y'all think about that? I know for us Western-minded individuals, we are not underneath a king. So sometimes it's hard to wrap our brains around the dynamic of living that way, regardless of the fact that that's how our Bible is instructing us towards what is coming, and that's a kingdom. You know, your kingdom be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's a kingdom coming. And if there's a kingdom, there's a king, and that king is going to be in charge of that kingdom, and that king has a way that life will be conducted in that kingdom. Hence the parables that Jesus mentions or Messiah mentions to us about the kingdom of heaven is like. So, you know, just kind of sidebar, I wanted to mention I read something not that long ago of a place in the Middle East where the entire city is white buildings and no one is allowed to drive a vehicle of color other than white or a light silver. And they comply because this is their king. That is something that's difficult for an American to embrace, but that's what it's like underneath a king. They have rules and laws and people abide by them regardless. So even though, my point being, even though we may not be able to connect with it within our own lives, just understand, and as we see further down in this book of Esther, when she approaches the king, that there's many different opportunities where we read that there is definitely a way that's conducted in this kingdom. We see in verse 13 that the king is going to take this situation that he's faced with to his wise men. So he's got a group of individuals that he goes and speaks to. And it says here, because they understood the times, that it was custom for the king to speak this way. So they were people who were intimate with his laws, abided by these laws, upheld his laws, and they were trustworthy for the king to be able to bring this to them and kind of pick their brains about. And one individual steps out and says, you know, she needs to go, because if she's the king, if you're the king and she's your queen and she's not going to listen to you, well, then the rest of the land is going to look at this as, we don't need to listen to him either. And we don't even need to listen to any man that's in charge if they're not going to listen to the main man who's in charge. And so she's put out of her current position. I was thinking, you know, I like to look at this book, since it's not mentioned, the Lord is not mentioned per se in this book at all, which is kind of strange to me. But I like to look at it and see where I can find the Lord and see where he's at work and things that are just really signature God, you know? And I already mentioned how this makes a way. So a path is created for Esther to be able to come into this situation. But I also like that when Vashti is put out of the situation, no harm comes to her. You notice that? She's not allowed to be with the king any longer, but she's not killed either. So I like that. I'm thankful for that, because while it was disobedience to the king, there was a purpose behind it. What do y'all think?